Our main story tonight, a conversation with U.S. Ambassador to Mexico, Christopher Landau. The ambassador was nominated by President Trump in March 2019, unanimously confirmed by the Senate, and presented his credentials to President Lopez Obrador in August. A graduate of Harvard Law School, clerked for Justice Scalia and Thomas, and argued 9 cases in front of the Supreme Court. His father, George, was U.S. Ambassador to Paraguay, Chile, and Venezuela, so he grew up in Latin America and speaks fluent Spanish. Ambassador, thanks so much for joining us on the show today. What a great jacket.
How are you doing? Great to see you, Dan.
I love it.
This is a hip place. You know, I got to look the part. I want your audience to embrace me and feel like I'm at least partially as hip as the show.
Ambassador, I wanted to start this conversation with complete sincerity. To be honest, many of us here in Mexico were extremely nervous about who would be appointed to represent this administration. But I've spoken to many people, American groups, people in government, journalists. People really like you. You've generated a lot of respect, and that's not easy these days, ambassadors. You have an incredibly robust and positive Twitter account with a lot of engagement. And I always joke around, you have more fans than the embassy itself. What's your secret?
How can you get mad at somebody in an Austin Powers jacket? That's what I want to know.
What's your secret?
You know, listen, the secret is I love my job. I really love Mexico. And I think the relations between our countries are so important for each of us. So, you know, I'm just glad to be here every day. You know, with the job as ambassador, you don't know how long it'll last. You serve at the pleasure of the president. So any day could be your last. So I really try to enjoy it to the full. And I think that shows. I've really enjoyed social media. You know, it's funny, before I got here, I didn't do any social media. I was a super boring lawyer in Washington. And I got here, I put up a tweet, and before I know it, I had 10,000 likes. I said, wow, there's a lot of power to this. And so it's just a great job. You know, it's challenging the way that families have disagreements. The U.S. and Mexico have disagreements, but you know, I think we're trying to work them out, and it's just a pleasure to be here. So I guess that shows.
That's great. There's been a lot of news lately. There were protests on Friday. There were reports that the protesters were throwing Molotov cocktails over the fence of the embassy. What's going on? How do you feel about this? And are you worried about more protests happening in the future?
Look, I don't even like to use the word protest for what happened on Friday. I mean, we certainly had protests in past days, and certainly I can understand that. A lot of people were very upset about the George Floyd case, as was I. And, you know, that's certainly a basis for legitimate protests and concerns. What happened last Friday, though, was a bunch of folks in black hoodies and you know, anarchist flags showing up and just throwing a Molotov cocktail and stones at the embassy. You know, nothing penetrated the grounds of the embassy, thank goodness. You know, it was a relatively small group. I certainly don't think that represents any significant segment of Mexican public opinion. But you know, I think, as I indicated on Twitter over the weekend, it's very important to distinguish between lawful protests, which are not only permissible, but are protected under our constitutional system in our country, and, you know, violent attacks on the embassy. So again, I think this was a relatively small minority of people, and I feel very comfortable and welcome in Mexico. The Mexican people have been very kind to me, and I think the people of Mexico, the vast majority, understand that given our ties of history and geography, that it's important to have a good and constructive relationship with the United States.
Absolutely. And it was pretty much in contrast to the protests on Thursday, which were largely peaceful.
Exactly. That's why I don't even think what happened on Friday, I like to use the word protest. I think that was a totally different animal, and it was more of an attack by vandals. And so again, you know, that's why I think we got to be very careful with the words we use, not to blur that line between those two different phenomena.
Right. And there's been a lot of protests going on in the United States, in different cities. And I know there's a lot of viewers watching tonight that have family members that are living in the United States, and are largely the protests are about the police brutality against marginalized or minority communities, and many people have family members are there. What do you say to the people to ease these fears?
Well, look, I think it's interesting. I was just reading the Declaration of Independence over the past few days because I've been preparing for the 4th of July. We're going to do a video and kind of a virtual experience this 4th of July for the American community. So by the way, this is a plug. We'll be putting out a video on the 4th of July. But I went back to read the Declaration of Independence, which I think is actually worth doing every once in a while for any American or anybody interested in the United States or really in politics. And when you read it, it's really about the same things that are at issue in the Floyd case. It's about human dignity and the relationship between the individual and the government, and how it's the government is a creature of the people, and it's there not to be the master of the people, but the servant. And I think it's very troubling when you see a video like the Floyd video where people in positions of power are abusing that power. I think for any of us who have the honor of having a government position, we have to consider ourselves, we have to recognize that we are public servants. We're here to serve the people, whether you're an ambassador or a cop or any kind of person in government. And to me, it was actually very inspirational to read the Declaration. And again, I think the peaceful protesters are certainly hearkening back to a long American tradition of tolerance and respect for the dignity of the individual. Obviously, there are a number of people in parts of our country who have crossed the line and gone into violence and looting, and that is not the American way. And I'm appalled by some of the images that I've been seeing from our country, and very saddened, to be honest with you.
Right, and it seems like a lot of times what happens in the U.S. has really an effect around the world, and it's affected Mexico deeply. And as I was telling you on last week's show, that a lot of these protests are also very similar in themes to the Women's March that happened in March, when hundreds of thousands of women, marched down Reforma to demand equal rights.
Well, again, I think that we've seen the same phenomenon when there's a lot of bona fide protesters who are lawfully and peacefully making their views known. But I remember at that time, there's also a minority of people who were, I think, frankly, anarchists, not protesters, and were taking advantage of the protests to go and just smash windows and loot shops. And I think that that's a real problem if, people can't distinguish between those two phenomena and they become intertwined. So, I believe strongly in the right to express your views in our country that's protected by the First Amendment. But again, you can't have vandalism and throwing Molotov cocktails. That's crossing a very important line.
Right. Let's switch gears a little bit, talk about something that's slated to take effect on July 1st. And I don't even know, is it still coming into effect because of all of this coronavirus stuff? But the USMCA is supposed to take effect. And this has been a huge piece of legislation that is going to dramatically change the US and Mexico relationship. Tell us, what are we, people in Mexico, going to feel most about this legislation when it takes effect?
Dan, I don't think that it will have an immediate, obvious impact on anyone's life. I think it's one of these things that is a very helpful backdrop for U.S.-Mexican relations. It's shocking to me as ambassador to read some of the accounts of my predecessors, their memoirs, some of their documents. And U.S.-Mexican relations were really quite tricky, really well into the 1980s. For most of the 20th century, they were really quite prickly. I think with the NAFTA agreement in the early 90s, the U.S. and Mexico have taken their relationship to a whole new level of economic integration. It's also been matched by cultural integration, social integration. I mean, the fact that you're here in Mexico is, I think, kind of a sign of the times, that we have all these ties between our countries, and not just at the official level, kind of my job, but frankly, I think you are probably more of an ambassador, or just as much of an ambassador to Mexico as I am. And I think that's such a healthy thing for the relationship. I think it is very helpful and positive that both countries have ratified the USMCA, or the TEMEC as they call it here, by very, very lopsided legislative margins. So, this relationship is no longer a particularly politically controversial subject in either country, which I think is a huge development. I mean, NAFTA passed by the skin of its teeth 25 years ago, whereas the USMCA was approved in our country by basically 90-10 margins in the Senate and the House, and here in Mexico, I think virtually unanimously. And this is under presidents in both countries, President Trump and President Lopez Obrador, who came to office with a history of deep skepticism about the NAFTA agreement. So I think it's really a sign of the times in terms of how far we've come, that people on both sides of the border, I think, recognize that free and fair trade is really a win-win situation for both countries. And certainly I see a major part of my job here trying to keep promoting those economic and commercial ties that I think ultimately are what puts our relationship on a very solid foundation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just keep on thinking in my head right now that if I can go on Amazon right now and find that jacket, is it going to be cheaper and easier to get if I can get it with this USMCA, right? I think that's what most Americans in Mexico are preoccupied by. Right?
That's the beauty of this, right? I mean, just think, you two could look as cool as I.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally upstaging me with that jacket.
You have all the lighting, you have the makeup artist. I'm just here in my study at home, so I got to do something to spice it up. Besides, by the way, I didn't have a chance to thank all of my Twitter followers who I gave a shout out on Twitter last night or a few days ago that I was going to be on the show, and I got a tremendous response. I think it's great. Hopefully this means, Dan, that new fans will be discovering your show. You certainly have a new one in me. I liked your No Manches segment. And you're kind of giving me a little bit of the hip side of life in Mexico City that I often don't get from my official cables and the reporting at the embassy. So
they don't say no manches and cables.
No, they don't.
That needs to change. We need to talk to state about that. Hey, listen, another question for you. You went to Harvard Law School in the late 80s. So my big question here is that, did you give Barack Obama a wedgie, or did he give you one?
I have to say, this is a little bit scary. I was actually 2 years ahead of President Obama in law school. So when I was in my third and final year, he was in his first year. I'm younger than he is, but by a little bit. But he was a first year student just as I was finishing up. I actually never met him in law school. He became president, or he joined the Law Review the year after I graduated. But Harvard Law School is an interesting place. There's a lot of smart people, not all of whom have a lot of common sense. I'll leave it at that. But I consider myself very blessed and privileged to have been given the opportunity to go there. And there are certainly, let me just say this: not everybody there is like Barack Obama. I mean, he was clearly a superstar even in that crowd. But again, it's education is a real blessing, and I count myself very, very fortunate.
So no wedgies.
No wedgies. Sorry.
No wedgies. Now listen, one of the secrets I think I've had about living in Mexico for 10 years is how much I really love the country and how much I really appreciate everything about the country. And I think that wears off. I mean, people feel it, right? And
right.
And I think you share the same thing. What do you love so much about this country?
Gosh, I find it endlessly fascinating, and I like actually the kind of ordinary lives of Mexicans when I have chances to experience that. You know, I love here in Mexico City to go to the Mercado de Jamaica, where they have incredible fruits and vegetables as well as flowers. You know, I still kind of have to pinch myself that, you know, I live in this place. I'm not just a tourist here for, you know, a few days or a week or so. And, you know, I love seeing new fruit, seeing the you know, the people who bring in the fruit, asking them where they got it from in the holiday season, you know, seeing all the piñatas there. Last Christmas time, I bought what I called the piñata más gigantesca de Mexico there. It was about, I don't know, 7 or 8 feet tall. It was taller than I am. And the most fun part of that was seeing it come back on my black Suburban through the streets of Mexico City, like, you know, tied to the top of the car, the piñata mobile. But, you know, it's just experiences like that I love. You know, the obviously there's many cultural experiences here. The Dia de Muertos, the whole month of October, I felt like I was in a fantasy land. It was so cool. All the, you know, cempasúchils all throughout, the marigolds all throughout Mexico City. I you know, went to a cemetery that night of the Day of the Dead, and you know, they're just experiences like that are really unforgettable, and I know I'll take to my grave. Just I'll always remember this very special time in Mexico.
Yeah, absolutely. And we hope that that continues, and that we can have a Dia de los Muertos celebration. There's been so many Americans that have come down to the city and discovered the hidden gem that is this place. And we're hoping that people will start coming back, and when this whole thing is over. Now, something with that, I think a lot of people are preoccupied by what's happening in Mexico City, or in the entire country, that COVID cases are rising. We're not getting out of the red light. And do you foresee, if things get worse, that there will be a closing of the border and that we won't be able to fly back to the U.S.? Because it's been great that we are able to travel right now during this crisis.
Yeah, I mean, certainly flights, there's been no restriction on flights to or from Mexico by either government throughout this whole crisis. Obviously, given the sharp reduction in demand, the airlines have reduced the flights fairly drastically. I think we're somewhere maybe about 10% of the level of flights. But a lot of people ask me, are there any COVID-related restrictions on flights to or from Mexico? And the answer is no. If you can get a seat, obviously at the airport there are health checks, and you can't fly if you have any symptoms of COVID. And obviously I would hope that you wouldn't even think about doing that, because you'd be very infectious to other people. You know, I would be, again, those decisions are made by the health authorities, not by me. But certainly we have come this far without that. And, you know, I would like to think that we'll get through this crisis without imposing that kind of travel restriction. But again, you know, you just never know. The situation can change dramatically. You know, my sense is that it is not, you know, we're not seeing the decline yet, which I was kind of hoping that we would be by now, by mid-June. But it seems like, you know, we're going up somewhat steadily, but not dramatically. It's not, you know, my sense is that we're not kind of seeing an exponential rise in cases, but you know, I think we're at something of a rough plateau, albeit at you know, at a level that is higher than I think a lot of us would have liked. Yeah. But you know, I'm obviously on the land border, it's a different thing, that we have restricted. You know, both countries have entered into agreement to restrict border crossings at the land border, which obviously involve a much greater volume of people. While the COVID numbers are, you know, what they are on both sides of the border. I'm hoping that we'll be able to restrict those, to lift those restrictions at some time soon. But you know, again, that's not within my control, and that's, you know, the health authorities are looking into that. You know, as long as there's, you know, pretty widespread community contagion on both sides of the border, it probably doesn't make sense to be encouraging more people to be traveling.
Yeah, absolutely. Ambassador, I would love to chat with you for another half an hour. We're running out of time. But what I want to say is that I think your jacket is going to be the star of the show today. Everybody's been commenting on social media on our feed about it. So take a picture of the ambassador, and I want you to use this hashtag ambassador jacket, because I think that's the coolest ambassador jacket that we've ever had in the history of this show and anything else. So, ambassador.
You know, if you can't be cool, you might as well dress cool. That's my motto.
And honestly, like, and I told you this before, you know, sometimes I might be in a different political spectrum in terms of ideas, but I am very proud as an American here in Mexico that you are representing us here. And thank you very much for that, Ambassador. And thank you so much for being on the show today.
Well, Dan, thank you for the invitation. Let me say I'm proud of you as an American citizen to come here to Mexico as an entrepreneur, to start a business out of nothing, and to really make it into one of the hubs of the American community here in Mexico and to have the show on. So it's really an honor and a pleasure for me to be on your show. Invite me back again. I'll take you up on it. Take care.
All right. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for joining us. Yeah. Ambassador Christopher Landau, U.S. Ambassador.